Morning, members, and welcome to the Exmoor National Park Authority meeting of Tuesday, the 7th of February, 2023. My apologies for my slightly croaky voice, but I actually have a voice now, which, if it had been last Tuesday, I wouldn't have. So, hopefully it won't give up on me during the course of the meeting, although I suspect some people might think that may be an advantage. Anyway, we will move to item 1 on the agenda. Apologies for absence. I currently have Marcus Brevis, John Petrinos, Penny Webber and Vivian White. And that was all, was it, Judy? Item 2, declarations of interest from members. And I will look around the room. Please, anyone stick their hand up on any item of the agenda. Francis.
A personal interest as the governor of the Exmoor Federation of Schools.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest?
Yes, Mrs. Nicholson is looking at me expectantly to say I should also declare an interest as the governor of the Exmoor Federation of Schools.
Right. Right. And I know Mike Ellicott has mentioned to me earlier on item 6. He is, of course, chair of Exmoor Parish Council, isn't he? I did have suggested to him that should not preclude him from actually speaking. It's not a pecuniary interest. No, exactly. That was my feeling, all right. Move to item 3, the announcements. I expect several of you might have seen, but we have been offered announced, although the details are not there yet, an extension to the Farming and Protected Landscapes programme. Apparently, DEFRA have discovered some money under the carpet in the corner of the offices somewhere and decreed that that'll be a way of spending it, since they were obviously quite impressed with the way National Parks managed to spend it. So that's a benefit. We've had some quite good press on it. We've obviously got, it's an ongoing scheme here, and it's, well, working very well, I think, at the moment. Would be probably the best way of putting it. It's funded an awful lot of projects. I don't know whether Rob or anything or Sarah would just like to say a couple of words about what type of things it might have funded. Which year?
Yeah, you go on, Rob.
I think for us it's been, as Ishmael to remember, its objective was get money out to start with. And I think as time has gone on, we've been much more proactive in the quality of the projects coming forward. And I think another year, there's slightly hand-to-mouth, very, very welcome money, but another year is just another year. It would be lovely to think it would go beyond that and get a bit more certainty about that. But the team are very together now, they're very in place and embedded. So, but for us, it's now to push on getting some even better schemes along.
Thanks, Rob. We'll move on then to item 4. The minutes of previous meeting, which of the 6th of December. So, can I have Mike Ellicott? Thank you, Evelyn. All those in favour? That looks like everyone who was there agrees. Thank you, Julie. And any matters arising from those minutes, we'll go through on a page-by-page basis. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or even page 12. Right, thank you, members. Item 5 on the agenda. Public speaking. Have speakers but registered for the planning section, and Mr. Pugsley will take them in order against the items to which they're applicable. And we can move straight on to item 6. And for those of you, I think most of you met Andrew Laws, our relatively newly appointed Royal Surveyor, who's got the challenge of looking at our assets, both at them and after them. So I will hand over to Andrew to present his paper on asset disposal. Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning to you all. I appreciate that most of you will have read the paper, so what I propose to do is go through it again and just focus on some of the key points, if I may. So, the purpose of this report is to seek the authority's consent in principle, subject to valuation and the other key issues being resolved, to progress the disposal of 7 of the authority's assets. These assets include Cosgate Hill, East Anstey Common, Hawkridge Ridge Wood, Timberscombe Wood, Tubball Flats, Weir Cleeve and the school playing field at Exford. The authority is recommended to approve this body of work to enable rationalisation of the authority's estate and ease fiscal pressure. Our corporate ambition here is to manage the authority's estate and operations to support the delivery of the National Park's purposes. In terms of financial implications, the proceeds from the sale of these assets will allow the estate to fund its own capital investment rather than rely on National Park grant. These assets are currently valued at around £300,000 for accounting purposes, but we've yet to establish market value. In terms of risk, the disposal of these assets have the potential to prompt both a local and national response, and the authority will be seeking best market value in all circumstances. In terms of background and context, Exmoor National Park Authority is currently suffering from considerable financial constraints and is therefore prudent as part of a necessary response to review the estate portfolio. In May 2019, an acquisitions and disposal policy was adopted by the authority, and there are some excerpts below which I would just recap because I think these are quite important. When considering what to do with an existing asset, the authority's starting point will be to presume disposal, unless there is a compelling case for retention. The following questions therefore need to be considered when making the assessment. Does it have a core value in delivering national park purposes? Is there potential for enhancement or unlocking latent value in the future? Does it generate significant income or have the potential to do so? Is the potential to generate, is it essential for the operational function of the park? Are there legal constraints on disposal? Does the asset represent a net liability to authority in terms of cost, risk or difficulty of management? And finally, has the reason for acquisition or ownership become invalid? For example, the asset is no longer under threat because of statutory protection. There are also some practical considerations to take into account. These include the complexity of disposal, determining best value, the likelihood of finding a purchaser, whether a potential purchaser might threaten the special qualities of the asset, whether prudent investment prior to disposal might result in a high net return. The market context as well, is it a good time to sell? And finally, the reputational risk. Will we be criticised for disposing? Could this criticism be justified? The disposals policy was the foundation of the 2018-2019 asset review, which is a framework for considering the future of each and every property on the asset register. It was anticipated that the asset review process will be repeated at 5-yearly intervals. An estate strategy is currently being drafted. The strategy will provide vision, ambition and objectives across the estate's retained assets. and will deliver the National Park's purpose. Whilst the estate strategy is emerging, and in the context of the current financial situation, a high-level review of the estate has revealed the following assets, the retention of which is not consistent with the adopted retention and disposal policy. Please refer to Appendix 1 for additional information about the assets, and I've put Appendix 2 on the screen for ease of reference. So just to summarise the assets, they are the following. The first one is Cosgate Hill, which extends to approximately 58.56 acres and comprises an area of moorland, the top of which forms a ridge between Ashton Cleeve and Coscombe. The second asset is East Anstey Common. This property, which extends to approximately 138.38 acres, comprises an area of grazing land. It's also a triple SI, it's a special area of conservation and is open access for foot. The third asset is Hawkridge Ridge Wood. This property, which extends to 3.7 acres, comprises a small part of the woodland located in the parish of Withypool and makes up part of the larger Hawkridge Ridge Wood. The next asset is Timberscombe Wood. This property, which extends to approximately 7.37 acres, comprises a narrow band of woodland, part of a larger wood near Timberscombe. The fifth asset is called Tudbull Flats. This property, which extends to approximately 2.7 hectares, comprises a small parcel of land which includes a former field boundary or probable post-medieval date. The next asset is Weir Cleeve. This property, which extends to approximately 13.74 acres, comprises an area of woodland on the outskirts of Dolverton, running along Northmoor Road. And the final asset for consideration is the school playing field at Exford. This property, which extends to approximately 0.32 acres, comprises a small area of maintained grass located opposite the park's depot in Exford. So our proposal then is, assuming consent is granted in principle by the authority, the proposal will be to progress the disposal of the assets identified within this report. This will involve preparing the necessary groundwork prior to marketing the assets, and the preparations will include gaining independent valuations of each asset, further discussion with Devon County Council Legal Services, including getting an estimate of costs of sale, preparation of reactive press statements, initial discussions with potential purchasers, and obtaining fee quotes and marketing proposals from selling agents. It is important to note that the authority will be looking to secure best value on the sale of these assets. At the time of writing, the district valuer has not been instructed to prepare valuations of the mentioned properties. So in conclusion, it is unlikely that the retention of these assets identified in the paper will deliver the purposes of the National Park or provide significant annual income. Therefore, disposal of the assets will minimise ongoing liabilities and produce a necessary capital receipt. It is recommended, therefore, that the authority consents in principle to progress these disposals, subject to valuation and resolving any potential issues. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew.
All right.
Very much.
All right.
I suspect there will be some debate. I already have a couple speakers here, so we will move straight to debate. Eric, to start with, and Francis. Eric.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't respond when you made a comment about your voice just now. The last bit, could have, but never mind. Move on. Reference the listed, what we got 7. No issues at all with the first 5. Weir Cleeve in the term disposable at best market value. I struggle to see how you can apply that to this in this situation. You know, I suspect if someone offered you £1, I would snap their hand off. I think there could easily make a case that if you had to pay someone, so say a small sum to take it off off your hands, that could well represent best value in this case. I don't know, others who know the history of this place would agree, but I cannot see anyone paying real money for this. That's just, so I think there needs to be some exemption put in the recommendation that allows for that to happen. It's only a personal opinion. And the last one at Exford, because of its location and its close proximity up to the village, you know, one of the certainties in life is that things change, and I just can see change happens quicker than you think sometimes, and there is potential for something for that strip of land. And the other thing is, if it didn't have development potential down the road, you know, it's such a valuable asset potentially for the community of Exford. So I haven't got a clear-cut thought on that, but those two things married together tells me we should not be selling it. That's only a personal opinion. I'd find another bit somewhere if money was that tight, because I think we could be disposing of something there that's has long-term value and or has significant value to the community there.
Right, thank you, Eric, very much. All very valid points, which obviously is the purpose of debate here, to look at the consideration.
It's too early to move a minor amendment. I would definitely clear-cut one regarding Weir Cleave, but the second one, to my mind, is an either-or scenario. But either way, I don't think we ought to be putting it on the open market.
Right. Thank you, Eric. Those thoughts will be noted, and we'll come back to that before we get to the vote. Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Something along something slightly different and something along the same lines. Best monetary value for Weir Cleave might be a minus sum. That's I think the point about that one. I want to come back to the paper and what you very helpfully told us this morning. What the paper says is, as I go back to the right page, is that we want to go for best monetary value. Best value. It's important to note that the authority will be looking to secure best value on the sale of these assets. What it then goes on to talk about is the consent that you may or may not need to get, and we probably wouldn't need to get, to sell for less than that. What we talk about is the disposal of interest in land which the authority considers will help it to secure the promotion or improvement of the economic, social or environmental well-being of the area. That means it is envisaged that it's possible that things may be not sold for best monetary value. What we were told this morning was that it's important to note that the authority will be looking to secure best value on the sale of these assets in all circumstances. It's the in all circumstances that, and the reason I'm labouring this is that this is what the Crown Estate misquotes in its regulation. In its regulations it says in all the circumstances, which means you can consider the circumstances of that case. That they misquote it to mean to say best monetary value at any possible point. And I just think we need to make sure we're balanced and right on that. I take Eric's point about the Exford land. I think it's in a floodplain and therefore actually not really buildable on. Yeah? So in fact, in terms of that kind of, and the toilets had to be moved to somewhere really quite specific to get round that issue and so on and so forth. I'm not sure that it has the long-term value to the authority that Eric is thinking. It does, I think, have a value to the community. I think that that is a consideration that would need to be looked at. I was minded, and I am minded, to propose the recommendation, but bearing in mind that it's not in all circumstances, there are potential reasons that we would be wanting to consider in some cases. And the fact that we want to progress this doesn't mean to say we'll necessarily do it in every case.
Thank you, Francis. We will come back to some officer comments. I think it's probably important to hear debate first, actually. So Mike first, then Evelyn and Christine.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just pick up on Francis's last point, which was going to be my first point. The recommendation is recommended the authority consents in principle to progress these disposals. I'm assuming that isn't making a decision on any particular one of these assets that they will be disposed of. So it's just the underlying mechanism to get to that point. But it's not clear whether that is the case, so that's the question. So a decision is not necessarily being made once the process has been gone through, that this asset will be disposed of. There's another decision, presumably, on that basis. Next point was going back right to the beginning. We're being presented with, I think, 7 assets. Are there other assets? Has there been any member involvement in that selection to start with? And are there other assets? It begs the question whether there are other assets that could be looked at, whether we should be looking at those as well. And my final point is, I think it has been touched on, we need to look at that latent value, whether there is any value in development options on the land. I suspect not, given their sensitivity, but it's an important consideration that I think we talked about before. So it's just 2 or 3 points on those matters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. The parts within the detail of that, I'll leave that for officer response. The one bit I will answer, Mike, is yes, this is the start of a process. This is part of an asset review process that is looking right the way across our estate. But these are the ones that have been identified quite early on to look at. So it's by no means complete. This is only the beginning. So what I didn't want to do is go into debate about our other assets today. We'll look at what we've got in front of us, deal with that. Whenever the next stage comes through, it will be presented to members as Andrew manages to pull that policy together. Evelyn.
Yes, there were just a couple of points really, and also going on from what Francis said was presumably where we're talking about in all circumstances, we can say wherever practicable, which is, that's in common usage, and sometimes it's not practicable to go for the highest price. So I think we could cover that one off. I have a question about the best value for money. Are we tied into Devon County Council carrying out the legal work? Because when we're looking at best value for money, should we be going through some kind of competition at every stage of the process? That's just a comment really for reflection. And if we were to sell, and we're looking at principles at the moment, aren't we, as well as these particular instances. If we were to sell some land and there was any thought that it might be developed in the future, then we should have a clawback clause in the sale document.
Right.
In fact, we could do that as a matter of principle. So I think that's easy to overcome. That was my comment.
I think that clause has been inserted in other disposals we made, and I'm thinking of the land at Cutcombe Market, which I'm pretty sure that had a clause on of that type. I'm not sure. Thanks, Evelyn. Christine.
Sadly, we're in this position. I wish we weren't, but we are. So we've probably got to do some of this work, and I'm sad about that. I'm just interested to know at what point the public will be told what land, because there may be some concern from the public. There may be a lot of concern from the public, and what sort of consultation are we going to do in preparation for that, so that people don't suddenly say, oh, up for sale. They understand the process we're going through, so it won't come as too much of a shock. Because whatever we say about the land, it is part of their community. The people that live in that community, it's part of their land, and they're probably very fond of it for lots of reasons. Very concerned about the school and what conversations have been gone through with the school in depth as to how, I don't know everything about education, but I do know they have to have a certain amount of play area space per child. And if that really upsets the apple cart within the school communication, that will upset parents and everything else. So I'd like to see a full investigation on if that's been done as much as we should have done it, to be sure that we're not going to contribute to the upset of the whole school community if they've got to walk 2 miles to play football or whatever. I don't know those details, but I'd be very interested in them. I am concerned about giving money away, because if we sell it too cheaply in 5 years' time, we will regret it. You can only sell things once, so this is a very important piece of work, really, and we can't rush it. You know, it's no good thinking 2 years later, oh, we shouldn't have done that, that's too late. I'd rather take a bit longer, be as thorough as we possibly can, and be sure that we're doing as much as we can to do the best with our assets. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Just one comment from me there. The process of informing the public has already begun in some way, in many ways. We've had quite an active PR campaign suggesting the current quite parlous state of finances, and probably the one area I'd like people to focus on is the fact that this hopefully can provide the opportunity to focus more of our national park grant on delivering core purposes to the public, rather than supporting property that at times is a bit questionable as to what it actually delivers. Quickly, Eva, come back.
It was just very quickly. I'm beginning to get confused, Chairman, so just for clarity's sake, are we saying today that if we agree with the motion, that the consultation exercise will start in earnest, and then when we're closer to actually selling something, that will come back to the authority to discuss and approve?
Sarah.
Thank you, Evelyn. On this, I mean, I think what we wanted to do is really gauge your opinion on this. If you know, we need to get on with it. I don't want this to drag on for months and years. We've got a compelling need to bring some capital receipts into the organisation, and it's going to make Gordon's job incredibly difficult if we don't get on with some of this at some speed. Now, I also appreciate that there are some that are, I mean, Exmoor School is a good one. You know, it's not going to bring in very much money. It's complicated. There are sensitivities, and there are sites where, you know, it's not going to make a massive difference. So what I am minded to suggest is that where we've done the consultation we need to do, where we've got DV valuation, where we've got a buyer that we are happy with, and it doesn't seem to be politically, you know, difficult or sensitive, then we simply get on with it in consultation with the chair and deputy chair. If there are sites where this is obviously a much more balanced decision, it's a difficult decision, and we want your steer, then I would suggest we bring them back. But I think to bring back every tiny site, if you've got a site that's very clear, you've got a very good buyer, it's a sensible amount of money, we can get on with it. But if it is a complicated one where, you know, there is a balance where we think there are political sensitivities, then I would want to bring it back to you. And I can't say before, you know, we've gone through the process which of those we would bring back and which we would go ahead, but we'd obviously do it in consultation with the chair and deputy chair.
I've got several people that haven't spoken yet. I will come back to you, Mike, in a moment. Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. What I was going to say sort of echoes what Sarah has just said, that this is a staged thing. We're worrying about valuation issues, but we haven't even had the district valuer's report yet. I think the important thing is if there are concerns, that the district valuer is fully briefed about those concerns, so that he can come back with the fullest valuation. And then once we know what those are, we'll have a steer where we're going. And I assume that agents will be involved. They will have a view of value, So there'll be a check and balance all on that. And if concerns remain, then it's up to the members to decide whether those particular sales go forward. But at the moment, we don't have the information to make that decision.
Thank you, Jeremy.
That's my point.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. Best value isn't necessarily the highest value, as we've discussed, and I think that's the key point that we have to have before us, along with trust in the process that the Chief Executive has outlined, and I think the assurances that she gives us are ones that we can take and agree with wholeheartedly. I think, though, there are some important principles that we need to just flag up. One is that the National Park has been a responsible landowner, is a responsible landowner. I would hope that in any disposals we are not taking notice just of the person to whom we are disposing of it to, but successive disposals, because in 30 or 40 or 50 years' time, we don't want to find that a potential purchaser is misusing what are potentially very strategically important, locally important, and sometimes in landscape terms very sensitive sites. So I would hope that we have the right legal conditions in place to make sure that, I don't know, glamping pods, for instance, don't suddenly get put there under a licence that we had no expectation of. But it is exactly that sort of thing that I think we have to be very wary of, because although the description of a lot of these sites is that they are in isolated locations, for me, some of them are absolutely the centres of my universe. East Anstey Common is not an isolated location. It's something I drive by at least twice a day. It might be isolated in the sense that it's not part of a consolidated national park holding, but they're not necessarily dim and distant parts of the country of which we know nothing, and we can quietly forget about them because they're out of sight. They aren't. To lots and lots of people, these are very, very sensitive and important locations. And Hawkridge Ridge Wood, for instance, is in walking terms, riding, in all sorts of other terms of location and to some degree access, it's important. Tudballs, splats or forefields, whatever you want to call them, historically and in terms of landscape is also very important. So I think we do have to be very cautious. However, the principle is established. As long as we've got the right safeguards in place, I'm sure it's fine. The one that I do agree with other members about, however, that I would be rather inclined to reserve back from this process is that little bit of ground at Exford, not just because of its importance to the community, but it does actually adjoin a usages that we have as an authority. And I can quite see that again in 10, 20, 30 years' time. This authority might rue the day that it disposed of that little bit of ground. So I would be rather inclined just to maybe keep that one back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Stephen. Linda.
It's a little bit on the same vein. Exford playing fields, is there any protection in the local plan as public open space for that site? That's the question. And for at least two others, looking at the maps, let's say Cosgate Hill and Timberscombe, it doesn't look as if they're public rights of way that go through those. I've not actually followed this up. But Timberscombe, the track leads to a hill fort, so that would be good to protect if it's not a public right of way. Similarly, Cosgate Hill, you can do, if you can't walk very far, you can actually do a nice little circular over the top and then back round above the valley. So again, it's can we protect those as rights of way or public access? So, thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I will get that to be answered in a moment or two. There's quite a list then for Sarah and Andrew to work their way through. Fran.
Thank you. I understand the need to look at maybe disposing of assets, but
I would like the final decision to come back to the committee, but I also understand fleet of foot when you're in negotiations, etc. So that has been mentioned before. Financial value, but also community and future community use is important to me, I think, and that has been brought out in different comments from the committee. It is in today's paper, so I'm surprised there aren't any representation here already from members of the public. I thought perhaps they would have had some kind of campaign or something within their area. It might be remote for some of us, but it's for people who live in those areas. It's the centre, like you say, Stephen, the centre of their universe. What sort of timescales and with regard to consultation, etc., and decision making are these likely to be? I know we don't want it over so many years, but I think it's going to take a while before anything comes in to increase the coffers.
Right, thank you. We'll add that to the list of questions, Fran, in just a moment. Jeremy, absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman. Agree with everything that's been said so far, I think. Just for to tease out a couple of points, really, from my own perspective. I think I agree with the holding back, perhaps, of the schools, the grammar school export site. And thinking of the Weir Cleave, there's an awful lot of people out there with an awful lot of money looking for a bit of amenity land. If your house backs onto it, or it's not too far away, or even if you live in the city, there is a huge demand. So we shouldn't sell anything without getting enough money for it. We should also, perhaps, on our sales, people will look at splitting things up, perhaps if we want to maximise return. But on the flip side of that, anywhere where there's footpath, rights of way, public rights of way, when these things get into private hands, multiple private hands possibly, you lose control, and things can get really quite complicated. Ask Mr. Holtham, I'm sure he knows exactly what all this is like. So it's just a warning that there's a lot of resource out there, but once you've sold it, you've sold it. They don't make it anymore. That's why it's so valuable, isn't it? You know. So understand where we're going. Absolutely, we do need. We shouldn't sell it unless we can get decent value out of it. We're better off holding on to it, aren't we, until another time? But you can't say that this bit won't be of value until you've advertised it. I think almost any interesting bit of land with trees on, it will attract a lot of interest, and that takes some managing. And think also about where there are public rights of ways that are of great value to the community. Things can get very complicated. That doesn't mean that just because we own it at the moment, it wouldn't be fine if it was owned by somebody else. But you know, rewilding, all sorts of stuff going on, value for carbon sink and all those sorts of stuff all round me. I mean, 600-700 acres is just gone for rewilding. All dairy farm. You know, there's a lot of energy out there.
Thank you, Jeremy. Andy Meld.
Just a quick one, really. It's that we need the money. We need the money. And so whilst all these sites are of great importance to lots of individuals, all of which have got a variety of reasons for wishing to preserve them, whether it's a school playing field through to a public right-of-way through some beautiful location, we need the cash. And I think we need to encourage the officers to get on with the sales of this rather than actually tying their hands by saying we've got to discuss every single plot of land that we wish to, which we get an offer for, and that's my only point, really.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that.
Chairman, thank you. I think I've heard all the comments. I understand all the concerns. I don't think we should be arrogant enough to think we're the only landowner that does a good job. I think many landowners out there do fantastic jobs, probably better than we do, to be honest, because we are a public authority and tied with all the public authority rules and regulations. I completely agree with Andy. We've been around this over and over again. I think the distraction here is we're actually talking about various, in most cases, very small parcels of land. Of course, they're all important to various people in various ways, and I think to all of us, generally, because we're here as Exmoor National Park members.
I think we need to get on with it. I don't think we can change the situation we're in. We've been talking about it for at least 18 years. So I would take great pleasure in moving the recommendation. And let's move on.
Thank you, Andrea. I will. No, I've already had. Was yours a? That's what I thought you did. So I thought you did. Seconded. Thank you very much. Was there anyone that hasn't spoken yet that would like to speak? Yes, and then I was going to come back to Mike. Mike.
Chair, I think most of it's been said. I think we do need to move on, but I think we also need to recognise it's not solely a monetary exercise. I do know that that's the driver for this, but we need to recognise it's also got community value as well. So, providing that's taken into account, it's not one of the criteria that's been listed, but it may well, these areas may well be important to local communities. We've not got that particular evaluation built in. So it's trying to recognise that as well, but we do need to move matters on, so I'm quite happy to support the recommendation, providing we've got that recognition as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eric?
Yeah, a couple of points. I appreciate the comments made by Jeremy in reference to Wheel Cleave, but I suspect he's not 100% aware of the liability that this bit of land carries with it. Without that knowledge, I suspect, if he had that knowledge, I suspect he would reaffirm his opinion on it. But that's a small point. I think the one issue to me here is reference the Exmoor site. Yeah, I mentioned that how quickly things change, and it's been mentioned the site's currently in the floodplain. Now, probably I've seen the planning system for far too long now, and I've seen changes come and then they go. It's all done at the whim of a minister in Whitehall. You know, Eric Pickles comes to mind. You know, he really put the cat amongst the pigeons. And it only needs another one of that ilk to come in a position of power, and you could, in 10 years, these floodplains may not exist. And that's the point I'm making. Things do change. You know, because of the sensitivity of the site, I would much prefer that site not to be in this equation. And also, I'd like to have heard from the Exmoor member here on how it is or is not of significant value to that community. Whether he's prepared to do so,
I think
don't.
Opportune time to ask Mike to say something.
So the question that I'm asking, has that site got to be included, you know, totally with the rest, or can it be dealt with in a different way?
Right, I will add that to the list of questions here. Mike, before we move back to Andrew.
We all seem to be working on the assumption that nobody can look after land better than what we do. And to be quite honest, I'm not impressed with some of the land we look after. I shouldn't say it in an open meeting, but that's the way it goes. There are people out there that can look after land as well, if not better. And providing any of the assets that we're looking at selling would be sold with the proviso that the use of that land met with the national parks process and regulations. I can't see a reason why we shouldn't dispose of them. Long term, like we've heard so much about this bit of land in Exmoor, there's no reason why it couldn't be, and I shouldn't. I declared an interest already, but the local council, for example, could look after that bit of land. They've got land already in the area, the village green and the cricket field. We could look after that in the same way. It would be a disaster to lose that little bit of land for the village school and the community. So, with that in mind, the parish council would be a natural successor to the national park, as I'm sure other people would, even the Education Authority. I don't know what position they're in at the moment. I haven't spoken to them, but I have been asked what's happening about that particular bit of land, bearing in mind its value to the community. So I can only speak for that bit of land personally, but as far as the rest of the land that we're looking at selling, there is no reason why we couldn't sell it with the clauses that it is kept in the same condition that we look after it or improved without destroying it for the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And Nick. Right.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose at the end of the day, if these are valued by the community, one thing we should do is offer them to the community. There is such a thing as a community, you can allocate it as a community asset, which then delays which any member of the public can apply to do, of course. One thing we miss out here is we don't actually talk about the operating costs of, say, Exmoor bit of land that's there. How much does it cost to maintain it? Because one of the things we're saying is we're selling an amount of property. The more conditions you put on the sale, within the sale, there's less likely you are to find somebody who wants to purchase it for a reason. We keep saying for a reasonable price. At the end of the day, you could turn around and say, well, here is amount of land, this is how much it costs, and these are the conditions around it. And in my case, I'd probably turn around and say, no, thank you. And that's one thing. So do we want to sell it? If we want to sell it, we should offer it to the community. That covers that. And on the basis of that, if the community wants to purchase it, Exford is a good example. You could come to some arrangement on the basis of that. And if there are rights of way through land that is sold, the rights of way don't just disappear, which we seem to also forget. I mean, I've got a right of way through one of my fields. I spend a lot of time maintaining the bloody rights of way, but it doesn't disappear once you sell it to somebody else. It's still there, and you still are liable to maintain it. What I'm talking about there, you were going to send me something about rights of way as well, Robin.
I am, yes.
Just thought I'd mention that.
I have got. I did find it the other day.
All right. Thanks very much anyway. Just my points. Thank you.
Thank you. I think quite a lot of issues raised, several on similar points. If I move to Andrew first, and then we'll come back to Sarah. Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. If I've made a list, let me go through them, and if I've missed anything, then let's see if my colleagues can pick it up. Firstly, let's just talk about the Village Green and Exford. As you rightly said, the reason for doing this is financial. It's unlikely that the Village Green is going to realise a big capital receipt for us in the context of this package, so it's an easy one to set aside. The other point about the Village Green is there's an example where we may be able to dispose or may consider disposing of at less than the optimum value because there is a community interest. So that's where this paper provides for that distinction between optimum and those sorts of community values that we talked about. Just going on my list as well, you're right in the sense that this paper is essentially asking that we can get started on this journey. And that journey will include quite a lot of due diligence, which will look at things like, you've mentioned, really good things like lotting, restrictive covenants. Would we regularize a permitted footpath into public right-of-way, for example? We'll look at overage clauses. We'll look at a whole package of things. And each one of these sites is going to elicit necessary responses along those headings. So that package of due diligence will do before we go to district valuer. So then the district valuer has got our proposition and he can attach the right value to it. It's worth mentioning that Weir Cleave is expensive from an operational point of view, and it may be that if it's sold for £1 and that's what the DB says, that will still be a benefit for us because that is a drain on our operating budgets each year. The cliff work there is very, very expensive. I think in terms of timescales, Gordon will help me out here. We need capital receipt this year, and depending on the size of that capital receipt, we will need another one next year. So, we need to get on with this and produce some capital this year in order to meet the potential shortfall. Let's see if I can pick up anything else here. I think that's probably all I can respond to, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Anything to add, Sarah?
I think Andrew's covered most of it. I think Cosgate, Linda mentioned about access. It is open access land. I think there's also a bridleway or a footpath across it, but I'd need to check that. And they say we will go through an internal process, certainly to make sure that there is appropriate access, and if we can, improve the rights of way network in doing so. The school. The school is a difficult one, isn't it? I kind of come back to, I want to support the community to do the right thing, but we also have to remember it is not our job to provide playing grounds for schools. And, much as we love to, we don't. That's not what we're here to do. And so if there is a better way of that land being owned and managed than us, then we need to look at that, because we do mow the grass. It is a liability for us to look after it. So I take everything you say, and I think obviously our first conversation will be with the school and the parish council on that one. And I think also just to reflect that it is really unusual for a national park to own this much land, this many buildings, this many properties. We've hardly scratched the surface with the things that we do own. There's over 20 buildings. There's 7% of the national park. That's an extraordinary large estate to manage, and it comes with costs. So the sites that are not really delivering for us, we do need to rationalise them down, given the size of the organisation, the size of our budget. So thank you for all your comments. We'll take that on board. And in terms of timescale, again, difficult to estimate, but it is a priority for us, and we will certainly be coming back to you this year with hopefully with some disposals. Gordon, did you want to add anything? I'm sort of looking.
Just a couple of points from me, just to mention to members that, of course, even it's not just a moral obligation, but actually we have a legal obligation to achieve best value. So that's written down in statute. And also we commit to it as part of our DEFRA grant agreement on an annual basis. So there's already these controls in place already. So in terms of where I go from here, it will be the case that I'll speak to Andrew afterwards, and I'll make a prudent assumption as to how much use of capital receipts I can factor into the budget for next year. And obviously it's not going to be a large number, because if you put in a large number and then the capital receipt doesn't get delivered, I've got more of a problem to fund it from somewhere else. But obviously there might be a point between 50 and 100,000 where we're optimistic that will be generated over the course of 23-24 that I can then build into the budget, and that will relieve pressure on national park grants. So where there are certain schemes that are developing, such as a new borehole at Tar Steps, for example, it might be that we can fund that from capital receipts rather than from national park grants.
Thank you, Gordon, very much. Well, quite an in-depth debate there, and thank you, members, for your questions and approach. There is an awful lot to think about. There's a couple bits that just was going to highlight before we move to the vote there. The first thing is that some of the effect of this is not just the capital receipt that we have, it's the fact that we've reduced the need for the management input that's there. And actually our staff team are under incredible pressure at the moment to try and cover all of this. It will give them the opportunity to focus more on those areas that are of the greatest value. So that's a point that's not in the paper, but I think it's necessary to remind ourselves. The other thing is Andy's point that was made, in that in reality we have to do something. It's not a case of postponing things and leaving it until next year. We have to start this process and move, and it has to be done properly with due diligence, which I'm sure it will be. Most of the other bits have been covered there. I have a proposer and a seconder. Before I move to that, last comment, Eric.
Could you please clarify what we're actually voting for on the Exmoor site? And the second one, if an offer does come in for Weircleave, something that's been done before, I would look to conclude the legal process within 24 hours before they change their mind.
I think that would be an incredible challenge for most solicitors I can think of, wouldn't it, really? I think, yeah. I do agree, though. Comment from Jeremy, we have to bear in mind we are in very different times now. People are looking at any pieces of property as an investment opportunity for the long term, and not always just to do something different, quite often just to protect it as it is. So those times we have to remember it's not like it would have been even 5 years ago. It has changed absolutely incredible amount in a short time. I think to clarify from my point of view, I said we had a proposer and a seconder on what we have here. I think the parts Andrew and Sarah will have noted carefully what's been said. I think the one plot that has come to the fore for discussion is that at Exford, and I think we need to bear that in mind and look at that carefully. Now, don't know whether members will be prepared to delegate to Chief Executive and to Andrew to ensure all of those concerns raised today are taken on board, and that it is Andrea.
Chairman, I think it was mentioned that it should be delegated to the Chief Officer in conjunction with yourself and myself, and I think that would give more reassurance to the members.
Right. Christine?
Just to underline, I would prefer X4 to come back before the final decision is made, because I think from the community's point of view, they will find it incredibly difficult to see Exmoor Park selling a children's play area. And I think from the communications point of view, we will look very sad indeed. So I'd be happy to carry on with it, but it must come back for final decision.
Right, Christine. I think Sarah's just nodded beside me and said, yes, with the exception of Exford, that we'll ask for members to be informed before it's proceeded or finalised. Can we proceed on the rest on the basis of the paper? And Exford will ask to be for members to be made aware before anything's concluded at that point. So on that basis, I had a proposer and a seconder. Is that all right with you, Francis, as proposer? Comes in. And seconder, Andrea, yes. And all those in favour? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much, members. It is a very difficult one. We will make sure that the public are kept informed. Caroline is very, very good at making sure the messages get out there through social media channels and so on. That's already been started, and we will leave Andrew to continue his rather complex work in order to try to keep Gordon's finances on the straight and narrow. Thank you very much, both of you. We will move on to item 7, which was the Exmoor Consultative and Parish Forum report, meeting notes of the 17th of November. Mike Ellicott.
Yes, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Quite an interesting meeting. Mainly, I shouldn't say mainly, but part of it was the fibre optic rollout across Exmoor, which was generally felt to have been a bit of a disaster. We'd put a lot of work into broadband coverage across Exmoor with the various masts that went up for the to help this problem. It's not as successful as what we would have liked, and it's very unhelpful that people like Openreach and that are quoting such vast amounts to get the rollout put to the villages and the properties across Exmoor. There are moves afoot to try to resolve these problems. I know Winnipole and Hawkridge are trying to do a programme. We at Exford are trying to do the same. Although I understand that Winsford coverage is going ahead quite well. Something to do with people, certain people that live there, I understand, but that's beside the point. Other than that, we did have a report on the National Park Conference, which was very, very, very successful. 3 verys. Okay. I was impressed, and I'm sure everyone that attended was impressed. And we must once again thank the people who put the hard work, the members of staff that put the work in, Dan James, Catherine Monroe, and Judy, of course. And I know they worked very hard on the day, and I don't know how, on the days, and I don't know how they kept up with it. But it was very good for the national parks. I think we will see a key change in national park conferences from now on, because we set a very good example of having a very successful conference with a much smaller input of financial input, but a much larger input of enthusiasm and staff. So that was brilliant. Just to mention that the next March meeting of the forum has been postponed or cancelled, shall we say, and you will find that details come through quite quickly, I'm sure, from Hazel. But no one did put through any agenda items, and with the situation that we've got financially, it was generally felt that unless there was something really pressing that people wanted to hear about or discuss, that we postponed that one until the following meeting, and that is what we have now done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. It was Fran.
Thank you. I don't know if this is probably the right place to say this, but because you mentioned the National Park Conference, I don't know if I fed back, but I was at the training for new members of national parks in Northumberland in November, and all I heard was everybody who attended were raving about how good the conference was here and how much they were so interested in all the different parts of our area that they visited. So I just thought I'd feed that back now, because I don't know if I've had the opportunity before. But thank you.
Thank you, Fran. That is very pleasing to hear, and nice to hear it from a different group anyway. So, and very, very, very much something for to go back to staff as well. That after all, they were predominantly responsible. We are asked to receive and note those minutes, Parish and Consultative Forum. Dominic.
I have one small point about the broadband, and again, whether it's the right time to do it, but I think it probably is. And Andrew will know this as well, is that a couple of weeks ago, we rely on airbands to a huge degree now across Exmoor. A lot of businesses like mine I couldn't remain living in Exmoor, frankly, for the airband connection that we have. And it fell over badly for about 2 or 3 weeks. We've never seen it on a status page before, where every single day it was saying, degraded service in Exmoor continues, degraded service in Exmoor continues. For a lot of people that meant no service at all. And they were incredibly unresponsive. People were getting quite, we were trying to reach out to them on Twitter, on emails, on phoning them was useless. They just shut down. And it just seems to me that just here in the authority, I think we do need sometimes to re-emphasise and record it in a public meeting, the importance of having a proper functioning broadband system and the lack of resilience when we only have one supplier. And much of Airband does a great job in a lot of ways, and actually their technological solution is really suitable for Exmoor. But crikey, when it falls over, it is pretty bad. And I think we just need to somehow, and I'm not quite sure how it works really, we just need, but I do think we need to record that this is something that we should be keeping an eye on, and passing this up to the powers that be, if we have such a thing anymore, that this is something that just needs ongoing attention. And I'm not surprised it comes out in the parish forum, as we all know, it's something that's becoming increasingly.
Thank you, Dominic. I think we'll delegate that as an action for Sarah to get in touch. After all, it is through the auspices of the National Park and Connecting Devon and Somerset that Airband were very, very well supported by us to set up the network they have. There's some expectation that they should be able to return that level of activity, and they currently are not. We'll leave that as an action for Sarah. we've received and noted the report at that point, and we can move on to item 8. Personnel update. We have 2 new starters in the planning office, Charlotte Spears as a planning officer and Joseph Rose as a planning officer. So the team there is heading up to full strength quite rapidly, which hopefully will deal with an awful lot of the concerns that have been raised before. We'll have one leaver, Catherine Dove, as Conservation Advisor, Historic Environment. Linda.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you know Catherine, but Catherine has been with us the whole time I've been here, so at least 10 years. She's very quiet. She's a backroom worker on the Historic Environment record, and she is one of the most efficient members of staff I think we've had in that team. She is absolutely great, and she is a big loss. She's set up what I would consider the best historic environment online record of all the national parks that I walk in. You can, the night before you do your walk, you can go on your phone and you can click on the map. You can see every ancient monument, or every site, doesn't have to be listed, that you're going to walk through and get enough detail and recognise what you're seeing and learn a bit more about it. You can't do that in the lakes, you can't do it in Yorkshire, can't do it in Derbyshire. And it's a really good record, but not only is it useful for recreation and education, it's an absolutely vital planning tool. So I would like to send a massive thank you, and hopefully the rest of you would too, to Catherine for all the work she's done. I'd also like to comment on the future, really, because I know I know it's likely to be a post that we just can't afford to retain. But that facility is so important for planning and as I said, for education and recreation. We do need to find a way, affordable way, of keeping it in good condition. So I hope that it will be considered as part of our financial review. But definitely please send a thank you to Catherine.
Right. Thank you, Linda. I think we will record our thanks for her time and contribution to that area of activity in the National Park. And I think your points are noted as well regarding the need to keep something of a resource there, Linda. Thank you. I've not been notified of any other business of urgency, so at that point I will draw the authority meeting to a close.